The quickest way to lose everything is to mistake dignity for weakness. By the time the sun disappeared beyond the skyline, one police officer would discover that the greatest mistake of his career had begun with a single moment of public humiliation. The afternoon air carried the warmth of early summer as hundreds of people gathered in Liberty Square for the city's annual Veterans Appreciation Ceremony. American flags rippled gently above the crowd. Children laughed while chasing one another across the green lawn, and a military band tuned their instruments beneath a bright blue sky. Families unfolded lawn chairs, local reporters adjusted their cameras, and decorated service members quietly greeted old friends they had not seen in years. It was supposed to be a celebration of honor, sacrifice, and respect. Instead, it would become a day no one present would ever forget. Standing near the edge of the square was a tall black man dressed in a neatly pressed charcoal jacket, dark slacks, and polished brown shoes. His posture was straight without appearing rigid, his expression calm without seeming distant. A silver watch rested beneath his sleeve, and in one hand, he carried a simple leather folder. His name was Marcus Ellison. To everyone around him, he appeared to be another quiet attendee waiting for the ceremony to begin. No medals decorated his chest. No uniform announced his accomplishments. No one noticed the years of discipline hidden behind his steady eyes or the quiet confidence that could only come from decades of service. Marcus preferred it that way. He believed respect earned without recognition always revealed more about people than respect demanded by rank. Across the street, Officer Daniel Brooks watched the growing crowd from beside his patrol vehicle. His assignment was routine: maintain order, direct traffic, and respond to any disturbances. He had worked enough public events to trust his instincts, or at least he believed he did. As his eyes swept across the gathering, they settled on Marcus. Something about the man's quiet presence caught Daniel's attention, though he could not explain why. Instead of simply observing, he started walking toward him with measured confidence, convinced he needed to ask a few questions. Conversations nearby softened as people noticed the uniform approaching. Marcus turned politely before Daniel even reached him, offering a courteous nod and a calm smile that carried neither fear nor arrogance. "Good afternoon, officer," he said evenly. Daniel barely acknowledged the greeting. His voice was firm, loud enough for nearby families to hear as he questioned Marcus about why he was standing there and whether he had permission to be inside the event area. Several people stopped to watch. Cell phones slowly appeared in curious hands. Marcus answered each question respectfully, explaining that he was attending the ceremony like everyone else and was waiting for the official program to begin. His tone never changed. His shoulders never tensed. Yet with every composed response, Daniel's suspicions seemed to grow instead of fade. The square, once filled with cheerful conversation, slowly transformed into a circle of silent anticipation. Children stopped running. Veterans exchanged uncertain glances. Reporters instinctively pointed their cameras toward the unfolding exchange. Marcus looked around only once, noticing the faces watching from every direction before returning his attention to the officer standing before him. Then, with remarkable calm, he quietly said, "Officer, sometimes the way we treat a stranger becomes the story we can never escape." Marcus Ellison remained exactly where he stood, his hands relaxed around the leather folder, while the silence between him and Officer Daniel Brooks seemed to spread across the square like a slow-moving shadow. The gentle music from the military band faded beneath the growing curiosity of the crowd as more people paused to watch. Daniel studied Marcus with narrowed eyes, convinced that calmness meant concealment rather than confidence. He asked for identification again, this time with greater insistence, and Marcus responded without hesitation, carefully reaching into the inside pocket of his jacket before stopping himself. Instead of immediately producing anything, he looked directly at the officer and spoke with quiet respect. "Officer, before I move my hands any further, I want you to know exactly what I am doing." His voice was measured, steady, and completely free of frustration. Several nearby veterans exchanged approving glances. They recognized the habit immediately. It was the kind of deliberate communication taught through years of military discipline. Daniel, however, noticed none of it. To him, Marcus was simply delaying the conversation. "I asked for your identification, not a speech," Daniel replied firmly. The words carried farther than he intended, drawing even more attention from families gathered near the stage. A young boy sitting on his grandfather's shoulders looked toward Marcus with confused eyes, while a local reporter quietly motioned for her cameraman to continue recording. Marcus slowly removed a slim leather wallet and held it where the officer could clearly see it without making any sudden movements. Daniel accepted it quickly, flipping through the contents with visible impatience. There were several cards inside, all neatly organized, but instead of taking time to read them carefully, he focused on confirming his own assumptions. "What exactly brings you here today?" Daniel asked. Marcus answered without changing his calm expression. "I received an invitation to attend today's ceremony." "From whom?" "The organizing committee." Daniel looked around the square, almost expecting someone to confirm the statement, but no one interrupted. The ceremony had not officially begun, and many organizers were still preparing behind the stage. The absence of immediate confirmation only strengthened his confidence that something was wrong. Marcus noticed the officer's growing certainty, yet his own demeanor never shifted. He had spent more than 25 years making difficult decisions under pressure, leading airmen through moments where patience mattered more than emotion. Compared to those experiences, standing quietly in a public square required very little effort. A soft breeze carried the sound of church bells from several blocks away as American flags continued to wave above the crowd. The contrast between the peaceful afternoon and the uncomfortable exchange became impossible to ignore. People who had come to celebrate service and sacrifice now found themselves watching a disagreement unfold in the very place dedicated to honoring those values. Daniel handed the wallet back without offering thanks. "Stay right here," he instructed. "Until I know exactly who you are not going anywhere." Marcus accepted the wallet with the same composed expression he had worn since the conversation began. He simply nodded once and replied, "I have no intention of leaving, officer. I came here because I was invited, and I intend to remain exactly where I belong." Neither man realized that, only a few blocks away, a convoy of Air Force vehicles had just entered the downtown district, carrying distinguished guests whose arrival would transform an ordinary misunderstanding into a moment the entire city would remember for years to come. Officer Daniel Brooks stepped a few feet away and spoke quietly into his shoulder radio while never taking his eyes off Marcus Ellison. His words were calm, but his posture revealed growing determination. He requested additional verification, explaining that he wanted confirmation before allowing the man to remain near the ceremony. To Daniel, he was simply following procedure. To everyone watching, however, the conversation had begun to feel increasingly uncomfortable. Marcus remained exactly where he had promised to stand. His leather folder rested calmly at his side, and his attention drifted toward the stage where volunteers were arranging rows of chairs for distinguished guests. A large American flag stretched across the platform, catching the afternoon breeze as sunlight reflected from polished brass instruments waiting for the opening performance. The peaceful setting made the tension surrounding the two men seem even more striking. A retired Marine standing nearby quietly leaned toward his wife and whispered, "That gentleman has the bearing of someone who has spent a lifetime serving." She nodded in agreement, noticing the way Marcus carried himself without impatience or resentment. There was something unmistakable about his discipline. Even children who wandered close to the gathering instinctively lowered their voices, sensing that an important moment was unfolding, although they could not understand why. Daniel returned after finishing his radio call. "Until I receive confirmation, I need you to answer a few more questions," he said. Marcus inclined his head politely. "Of course. Have you served in the military?" Daniel asked. Marcus smiled faintly before answering. "Yes, I have devoted most of my adult life to serving this country." The answer was completely truthful, yet it revealed almost nothing. Daniel interpreted the response as evasive. "Former service?" he pressed. Marcus simply replied, "Service never truly becomes former. For many of us, it remains part of who we are." Several veterans standing within earshot exchanged knowing looks. They understood exactly what he meant. Military service shaped a person long after the uniform was folded away for the evening. Daniel, however, focused only on the fact that Marcus had not offered a specific rank or assignment. He believed he was uncovering inconsistencies, unaware that Marcus was choosing humility over self-importance. Across the square, The event coordinator checked her watch with increasing concern. Distinguished guests were scheduled to arrive within minutes, and volunteers hurried to complete their final preparations. Local reporters repositioned their cameras toward the entrance where official vehicles would soon appear, but more than one lens continued drifting back toward the quiet exchange between the officer and the composed stranger. Marcus glanced briefly toward the roadway before looking back at Daniel. He knew the schedule almost to the minute because he had reviewed it personally several days earlier. Soon the guests would arrive, introductions would begin, and everything would become clear. Yet he made no attempt to accelerate the truth. He believed character revealed itself most honestly when no one realized they were being observed. Daniel folded his arms and took a slow breath. "You seem unusually confident for someone whose identity I still cannot verify." Marcus answered with the same calm voice that had never once risen above conversation level. "Confidence does not come from believing you are above the rules. It comes from knowing that the truth does not need to rush." Before Daniel could respond, the distant sound of approaching engines rolled through downtown. Heads turned toward the main boulevard as a line of dark blue Air Force vehicles rounded the corner, escorted with quiet precision toward Liberty Square, and for the first time that afternoon, even the conversations around them came to a complete stop. The convoy moved through Liberty Square with quiet precision, every vehicle polished to a mirror shine beneath the afternoon sun. Conversations faded into whispers as people instinctively stepped aside, sensing the arrival of someone important even before a single door opened. Uniformed Air Force personnel exited first, scanning the surroundings with calm professionalism before taking their positions near the entrance to the ceremony. Their movements were disciplined, respectful, and completely without urgency. It was the kind of confidence that came from preparation rather than display. Officer Daniel Brooks glanced toward the approaching vehicles for only a moment before returning his attention to Marcus Ellison. He assumed the distinguished visitors had nothing to do with the man standing before him. In Daniel's mind, those guests belonged on the stage while Marcus remained an unanswered question in the crowd. "Stay exactly where you are," Daniel said firmly. Marcus responded with the same composed expression he had maintained throughout the encounter. "I have not moved once, officer." There was no challenge in his voice, only simple truth. Nearby, a local television reporter quietly described the arriving convoy into her microphone while her cameraman continued recording both the ceremony preparations and the unusual interaction taking place only yards away. Several spectators now found themselves watching Marcus more closely than the official arrivals. His remarkable patience had become impossible to ignore. A young Air Force staff sergeant walking near the convoy briefly glanced across the square. His eyes paused on Marcus for the smallest fraction of a second before he continued escorting the arriving guests. His expression changed almost imperceptibly, as though he had recognized someone familiar, but protocol required him to remain with his assignment. Daniel noticed nothing unusual. He believed the afternoon was still under his complete control. The ceremony coordinator hurried toward the convoy carrying a clipboard, greeting the arriving officials with warm professionalism before checking the schedule one final time. She frowned slightly as she reviewed the list of keynote participants. One name remained unchecked. She looked across the square, scanning the gathering crowd without realizing that the person she was searching for stood only a short distance away. Marcus quietly observed the activity while keeping his attention primarily on Daniel. Years of leadership had taught him that moments of misunderstanding often revealed far more than moments of agreement. He understood that authority carried enormous responsibility because every public decision influenced how others viewed justice itself. That belief had guided every command he had ever accepted. Daniel folded his notepad and looked directly at Marcus once more. "Until everything is confirmed, I cannot allow you near the reserved seating area." Marcus answered with gentle courtesy. "I understand your responsibility, officer. I only hope every decision today is guided by the same standard for everyone." The words lingered in the air longer than either man expected. Before Daniel could respond, the rear door of the lead vehicle opened. Major General Nathan Carter stepped onto the pavement, his decorated uniform immediately drawing respectful attention from veterans, city officials, and members of the press. The band fell silent. Organizers straightened their posture. Cameras turned almost instantly toward the distinguished officer. Then, Before greeting anyone waiting near the stage, the general looked across the square. His eyes settled on Marcus Ellison, and a warm smile spread across his face as he changed direction and began walking straight toward him. Major General Nathan Carter walked across Liberty Square with the steady confidence of someone who had spent an entire career leading others through moments that demanded composure. The conversations around the ceremony faded almost completely as city officials, veterans, and members of the press watched his unexpected change of direction. Everyone had assumed he would proceed directly to the stage. Instead, every deliberate step carried him toward the quiet man who had remained standing patiently near the edge of the gathering. Officer Daniel Brooks noticed the movement but assumed the general intended to pass by on his way to another destination. He shifted slightly, maintaining his position between Marcus Ellison and the reserved seating area, while remaining focused on completing what he believed was a routine inquiry. Marcus, however, simply stood with the same calm expression he had worn since arriving. There was no hint of satisfaction, no attempt to draw attention to himself, and no effort to interrupt what was about to happen. He merely waited. As the general approached within several feet, a senior Air Force Chief Master Sergeant following close behind immediately recognized Marcus. His posture straightened instinctively, and without hesitation he rendered a crisp military salute. The gesture happened so naturally that several nearby veterans immediately turned toward Marcus in surprise. Major General Carter smiled warmly before extending his hand. "Colonel Ellison," he said with genuine respect, "I was beginning to wonder whether you had decided to arrive quietly again this year." Marcus accepted the handshake with an easy smile. "Good afternoon, General. I have always believed the ceremony is about those who served, not about those standing on the stage." The general nodded in complete agreement. "That is exactly why everyone here respects you." For a brief moment, Liberty Square seemed frozen in absolute silence. The event coordinator stared at her clipboard before looking back at Marcus with unmistakable recognition. She quickly realized why one distinguished guest had never checked in. Several reporters lowered their microphones in disbelief before immediately raising them again, understanding they were witnessing an unexpected story unfolding in real time. Officer Brooks remained motionless as the conversation settled into place around him. The name, the title, and the unmistakable respect shown by every Air Force leader suddenly connected pieces that had seemed unrelated only moments earlier. The leather folder Marcus had carried so casually was not the possession of an ordinary attendee. It contained briefing materials prepared for one of the ceremony's principal speakers. The invitation Marcus had mentioned had not come from a volunteer or a local organizer. It had come directly from the Department of the Air Force. Major General Carter turned toward Daniel with calm professionalism rather than anger. "Officer," he said evenly, "Colonel Marcus Ellison is one of our honored guests today and has dedicated decades of distinguished service to this nation. We appreciate everyone working to keep this event secure." His words carried dignity instead of accusation, leaving no room for embarrassment to become confrontation. Marcus quietly added, "The officer was performing what he believed to be his duty." Even after everything that had happened, he chose understanding over resentment. Those standing nearby noticed that decision immediately. It revealed more about Marcus's character than any military decoration ever could. Yet as cameras continued recording and witnesses quietly shared what they had seen, it became increasingly clear that although the colonel had chosen grace, the events of the afternoon had already created consequences that would extend far beyond Liberty Square before the day was over. The ceremony began only minutes later, yet the atmosphere inside Liberty Square had changed in ways no printed program could have predicted. The military band opened with a familiar patriotic melody, but many in the audience continued glancing toward Colonel Marcus Ellison and Officer Daniel Brooks, quietly replaying the unexpected encounter in their minds. The story had already begun spreading beyond the square as spectators shared short video clips with family members and local community groups. None of the recordings showed raised voices or dramatic confrontation. Instead, they captured something far more powerful: one man remaining respectful while another made assumptions that would soon face careful public examination. Marcus walked beside Major General Nathan Carter toward the stage with the same humble pace he had maintained throughout the afternoon. Several Air Force officers greeted him warmly, thanking him for traveling across the country to participate in the ceremony. A retired Navy captain smiled as Marcus approached and said, "Colonel, it is always good to see you putting people before recognition." Marcus answered with quiet sincerity, "Recognition fades. Character stays with us." Those nearby heard the remark and nodded with quiet appreciation. It perfectly reflected the man they had come to know through years of service. As the audience settled into their seats, the ceremony coordinator welcomed everyone and introduced the distinguished guests. When she announced Colonel Marcus Ellison's name, respectful applause filled the square. Many people who had witnessed the earlier exchange looked toward the stage with entirely different eyes. The quiet gentleman standing before them was not simply an invited guest. He was a decorated Air Force leader whose career had been built on responsibility, mentorship, and service. Officer Daniel Brooks remained near the perimeter performing his assigned duties, but the confidence he had displayed earlier had noticeably faded. His attention drifted repeatedly toward the stage as he watched Marcus greet veterans, Gold Star families, and civic leaders with genuine warmth. There was no sign of resentment, no attempt to embarrass anyone, and no public mention of what had happened only a short time before. Marcus treated every person with the same dignity he had demonstrated from the very beginning. That choice quietly impressed even those who had initially questioned him. Near the media area, reporters compared notes while reviewing the footage they had captured before the ceremony started. One journalist remarked that the Rayal story was not about a misunderstanding. It was about how quickly people formed conclusions without first seeking understanding. Another reporter agreed, pointing out that the colonel had never demanded special treatment, never introduced himself by rank, and never attempted to use authority to influence the situation. His restraint had become the defining image of the day. Meanwhile, inside City Hall, the first calls requesting information about the recorded encounter began reaching administrative offices. Supervisors wanted timelines. Event organizers wanted facts. Community leaders requested copies of available footage so they could understand exactly what had occurred before the ceremony began. No accusations had been made, and no conclusions had yet been reached. Instead, the process that followed reflected the principle Marcus had spent his career defending. Every important decision deserved a careful review of the truth before judgment was passed. As the afternoon sunlight slowly softened across Liberty Square, few people realized that the ceremony honoring service had quietly become the beginning of another lesson entirely, one reminding everyone present that integrity is revealed not when everything goes according to plan, but when respect is tested before the entire world. When the ceremony concluded, the applause lingered across Liberty Square, but another conversation had already begun behind the scenes. City officials thanked veterans, families gathered for photographs, and volunteers carefully folded rows of American flags that had lined the stage throughout the afternoon. Colonel Marcus Ellison remained long enough to shake hands with dozens of service members and community leaders before quietly preparing to leave. He accepted every expression of gratitude with humility, never mentioning the uncomfortable encounter that had taken place before the event. For him, honoring those who served had always mattered more than defending his own reputation. While Marcus spoke with several Gold Star families, Major General Nathan Carter met privately with the event coordinator, the chief of police, and senior city administrators inside a nearby conference room. Their discussion was measured and professional. No one sought to assign blame before understanding the complete sequence of events. Instead, they requested every available fact, including security camera footage, body camera recordings, witness statements, and media videos captured before the ceremony officially began. The chief of police agreed immediately. Public trust, he explained, depended not only on protecting the community, but also on reviewing difficult situations with honesty and transparency. Meanwhile, Officer Daniel Brooks finished his assignment in silence. The confidence that had guided him earlier that afternoon had gradually been replaced by reflection. As he replayed each conversation in his mind, he remembered Marcus calmly explaining every movement, answering every question respectfully, and never once attempting to intimidate him with rank or position. Daniel realized that the colonel had repeatedly chosen patience even when given every opportunity to respond with frustration. That realization weighed far more heavily than any criticism from others could have. Across the city, short video clips from Liberty Square continued spreading online. Viewers focused less on the identity of the distinguished guest and more on the remarkable composure he displayed throughout the encounter. Veterans commented that true leadership often appeared in moments when no one expected recognition. Community members observed that respect should never depend upon appearance, clothing, or assumptions. Many praised the city's decision to conduct a careful review rather than rush toward immediate conclusions. By early evening, Captain Rebecca Collins from the Internal Affairs Division formally received the case for administrative review. Her responsibility was straightforward. She would compare the body camera recording, witness interviews, department policies, and event documentation before presenting an objective report to police leadership. She reminded everyone involved that fairness required examining every detail without prejudice, whether those details supported or challenged anyone's initial impression. That commitment reflected the same principle Marcus had quietly demonstrated throughout the day. Before leaving the square, Marcus noticed Daniel standing alone beside his patrol vehicle completing paperwork. For just a moment, their eyes met across the parking area. Marcus offered a small nod of acknowledgement before entering the waiting Air Force vehicle. Daniel returned the gesture almost instinctively, understanding that respect offered after a difficult moment carried far greater meaning than respect exchanged when everything was easy. As the evening sun disappeared beyond the city's skyline and office lights gradually illuminated downtown buildings, the official review had only just begun, but one truth had already become impossible to ignore. Character had spoken more loudly than authority, and by the time the night reached its end, the evidence would tell a story that no assumption could ever rewrite. By the time darkness settled over the city, the review process was moving with quiet determination. Inside police headquarters, conference room lights remained on long after most offices had emptied for the evening. Captain Rebecca Collins sat at the head of a large table surrounded by printed witness statements, department policies, event schedules, and digital recordings collected throughout the afternoon. Every piece of evidence was examined in chronological order because she believed fairness depended upon understanding the complete story rather than isolated moments. The body camera footage confirmed that Colonel Marcus Ellison had answered every question respectfully, clearly announced each movement before reaching for his identification, and complied with every instruction given to him. Security cameras from Liberty Square showed the same calm demeanor from beginning to end. Civilian videos captured by spectators filled in additional perspectives, revealing how quickly the surrounding crowd had become uncomfortable as the encounter continued. No recording suggested hostility from Marcus. Instead, each angle reflected remarkable patience under public scrutiny. The review focused not on emotion but on professional standards. Supervisors carefully compared the officers' decisions with departmental expectations regarding communication, public interaction, and respectful treatment of community members. The objective was not to satisfy public opinion. The objective was to determine whether established policies had been followed consistently. Chief of Police Harold Bennett reviewed the preliminary findings alongside city legal advisors before requesting one final briefing from Captain Collins. After nearly 2 hours of careful discussion, the recommendation was unanimous. Officer Daniel Brooks would be placed on administrative leave pending the completion of a formal internal investigation, and his law enforcement authority would be temporarily suspended according to department procedure. The decision was documented with professionalism, free from personal criticism or public spectacle. It reflected accountability through process rather than punishment through emotion. Daniel received the notification shortly before 9 o'clock that evening. Sitting alone inside his office, he quietly read each page without interruption. The words were straightforward, explaining that the administrative action was not a final judgment, but a necessary step while the department completed its review. He signed the acknowledgement form, carefully removed his official badge from his uniform, and placed it on the supervisor's desk exactly as instructed. The room remained silent except for the soft sound of paperwork being organized. Across town, Marcus Ellison had already returned to his hotel after sharing dinner with several retired service members who had attended the ceremony. The conversation centered on leadership, military service, and the importance of mentoring younger generations. Marcus never mentioned the administrative decision taking place at police headquarters because he had neither requested nor expected it. Earlier that afternoon, he had already chosen forgiveness over resentment. As local evening news broadcasts summarized the day's events, reporters emphasized that the city's response demonstrated the value of transparent review, careful investigation, and respect for due process. Community leaders echoed the same message. Trust could only grow when institutions examined themselves with the same honesty they expected from the public. Before leaving headquarters, Chief Bennett looked once more at the case file resting on his desk and quietly reflected that every badge represented more than legal authority. It represented public confidence, earned one respectful interaction at a time. Outside, the city lights shimmered beneath the night sky, and although one career now stood uncertain because of decisions made earlier that day, the greater lesson belonged to everyone who had witnessed the events unfold. Real authority was never measured by the power to question another person. It was measured by the wisdom to recognize every person's dignity before asking the first question. The following morning, the first rays of sunlight reflected across the windows of City Hall, police headquarters, and the Air Force Liaison Office as each organization continued moving forward with quiet purpose. News coverage of the previous day's ceremony remained measured, focusing less on individual personalities and more on the importance of accountability, professionalism, and mutual respect. Community members gathered at neighborhood coffee shops discussed the incident thoughtfully, many agreeing that the most memorable image had not been the misunderstanding itself, but the remarkable composure shown by Colonel Marcus Ellison from beginning to end. His calm response had reminded countless viewers that dignity could speak more powerfully than anger ever could. A few days later, the city hosted a small appreciation breakfast for veterans and first responders who had contributed to the success of the annual ceremony. Colonel Ellison accepted the invitation without hesitation. When he entered the room, many expected him to avoid any interaction with Officer Daniel Brooks, who had also been invited after requesting permission to attend while the administrative process continued. Instead, Marcus walked directly toward him with the same calm expression that had defined every moment of their first meeting. Daniel stood respectfully and quietly said, "Colonel, I cannot change what happened, but I can learn from it. I appreciate the respect you showed me even when I had not yet earned yours." Marcus smiled gently before extending his hand. "Every profession carries great responsibility, officer. In the military, we remind our leaders that every decision teaches someone watching. Law enforcement is no different. The important question is never whether we make mistakes. The important question is what we become after recognizing them." Daniel accepted the handshake with sincere gratitude. It was a simple moment, but those nearby understood its significance. Accountability had been addressed through the proper process. Character was now being demonstrated through humility and growth. Later that morning, Chief of Police Harold Bennett addressed officers during a department meeting. Without criticizing any individual, he reminded everyone that every badge represented a promise made to the community. Professional judgment, patience, and respectful communication were not optional qualities. They were the foundation upon which public confidence depended. He also announced expanded training focused on communication, procedural fairness, and community engagement so that future encounters would better reflect the department's highest standards. Across the room, many officers quietly nodded in agreement, recognizing that the lesson belonged to the entire profession rather than one person alone. Before returning to his Air Force duties, Marcus was invited to share a few closing remarks with veterans, police officers, civic leaders, and young cadets gathered for the breakfast. He looked around the room for a moment before speaking in the same steady voice that had remained unchanged throughout every challenge. Uniforms, titles, and badges all represent honorable service, but none of them define our character. Character is revealed by how we treat the person whose story we have not yet heard. Every stranger deserves the opportunity to be seen before being judged, because respect offered first often prevents regret later. The room remained silent for several seconds before quiet applause gradually filled the hall. There was no celebration of another person's hardship, only appreciation for a lesson learned through grace rather than resentment. As Marcus departed, the American flag outside continued to wave gently in the morning breeze, reminding everyone who passed beneath it that justice is strongest when it walks. Beside humility, authority is most honorable when guided by compassion, And the greatest measure of leadership is not the power to command respect, but the wisdom to give it before asking for it.